Moses and Room on Fire Productions recently put out a video, which I'll link up there and in the description box below, where it was about the infamous Olofmeister three-man boost at Dreamhack Winter in the quarterfinals between FNATIC and LDLC, later to become Envious, in the deciding map that actually allowed FNATIC to come back into the game, win the map, since it was the deciding map, win the series, and then in theory would have gone on to the semi-finals. But it was protested, the admins decided that it was going to be replayed, LDLC didn't agree to the replay, LDLC was going to forfeit, they didn't forfeit, FNATIC forfeit instead, there was a lot of community drama around it. And the thing is, it was obviously an incredibly hot button topic at the time. I actually did a video, which I'll link there, about it and my thoughts on it, not that long afterwards when I got back to Korea. But one of the things that I think is interesting is, as I've thought about it over the years and as I've revisited it, I think I've found some elements of context that actually were missed, that people even missed in this video, and that people just haven't thought of, that make it even crazier and actually make it so that as bad as it was, in some senses, it could have been much worse. Not just for FNATIC, not just for the tournament, but for actually Counter-Strike as an esport. And so I want to put in all the context and then deliver some of those extra thoughts. So quickly, what we'll initially do is set up the context of the match. So in terms of where it was in history, it was the quarterfinal of the major. At that point in time, it was the fourth major in CSGO history. The majors had begun a year before, Dreamhack Winter 2013. It's FNATIC versus LDLC. They were the two clear best teams in the world because FNATIC had won, let me think how many it would be. I think they'd won 3 tournaments in a row. And yeah, face it, ESWC Fragback Masters. And LDLC had been in the final of 3 of those 3 of the last 4 tournaments they'd been in. They'd made top 4 at every tournament. FNATIC had made top 4 at every tournament. And because FNATIC had won 3 tournaments in a row, FNATIC were actually coming into this major as one of the biggest favourites in history to ever win the major, to potentially win the major. I mean, I'd actually put them as number 1 in that sense because they'd won 3 in a row. They were dominating their rival, which was LDLC. They had won all the matches against LDLC offline. So it was a very one-sided rivalry, actually. I mean, the only time that they even lost a map to LDLC was in the Fragback Masters final, and that was in overtime on Inferno, and that was FNATIC's best map, but that was in overtime. Otherwise, FNATIC had won all the maps. They'd won the 2 finals against LDLC, one ESWC in France, so right in kind of LDLC's face with all the home crowd on LDLC's side. And actually, FNATIC had even won games on DOS 2, which was Envious's best map in theory. It was like one of their primary maps, and would later on go to be the real backbone of the Envious era. I mean, they were LDLC at the time, but you know what I mean. So the mental edge went big time to FNATIC when this matchup happens. I mean, if LDLC lose here, they're out 5th to 8th. I mean, they're the second best team in the world by far, but quite clearly, but they would be out 5th to 8th, robbed of prize money, and you'd feel like, that's bullshit. Even worse, LDLC had won their group and FNATIC had come second in their group. So if you're LDLC, you feel like, what the fuck is this? Like, I win my group. What? I'm getting punished, getting the best team in the world, the most dominant team in the world, in the quarterfinals. How is this fair? Funnily enough, people don't know this, but that used to happen sometimes to Very Games. When Very Games was the second best team behind NIP, and the only team they couldn't beat was NIP, sometimes they've won their group, NIP's finished second in their group, and they've had to play them in like the quarterfinals or the semi-finals of a tournament, and it's been like, we would be in at least second place. So it feels unfair for your LDLC, and I can see how you're already going to have even more of a psychological disadvantage. Both teams, as I said, had been top 4 every event with those 2 lineups that they'd had, so one of them's going to lose their streak right at this point already. And if you're FNATIC, they had the whole cheat accusations swirling around them. And people forget this. Yeah, most of the clips were flusher. And there was even other pros speaking out about it. But there was a couple of clips of Olofmeister. There was that famous one on Mirage where he does the snap over to the window. There was, I think, maybe one clip of Crims where he won like a 1vx situation or something like that. So there was a lot of at least distrust and suspicion surrounding FNATIC, if not people like Shocks outright just saying flusher cheats, and people making these rather rash statements. And the thing is, all that started only about a week before the major, so the timing was really bad for FNATIC. So this match starts, the opening map is Dust 2, and this time LDLC wins Dust 2. They win it in kind of the fashion that they'd later become quite famous for in Envious, which was great T-side, really based off shocks in mid-round, in the middle of the map, and this is how they're able to win it. In the past, part of the reason why Fnatic was able to win so many of the Dust 2s, or these key ones, even though Envious was in theory the better team on it, is actually just because it was JW's map. He used to just go all around it going crazy. So they win it, and here's the key detail. Not only have they won their own map, but they've won the opener in the series, something that actually Envious, well, LDLC with this lineup had never done against Fnatic at that point in time. They always went down 0-1. So then the next map is Cash. Now, even though later on Envious would become amazing on Cash, at this time, Cash was probably Fnatic's second best map after Inferno, and they were really good on it, and Fnatic win this comprehensively, like really convincing win. So we go into the decider. The decider is going to be Overpass. Now, the teams had played this at Fragbite Masters like a week and a half before. Fnatic had won it. They'd mainly won it, though, off their T-side. And Fnatic at the time was not a super strong T-side team. Actually, neither was LDLC, actually. They were mainly CT-dominant teams. And this is obviously a map where you could run up a lot of CT rounds, just playing in the sites. This was before the rework. And they'd gotten a 9-6 CT half. So you think, oh, I might be in trouble here. But they'd won 7 rounds on T-side in like 12 played or something, and they won that map there. So actually, this one, it looks like Overpass is going to favour Fnatic here. LDLC starts out on CT side first, and they have a flawless half. They win 12-3. Second half starts, they switch over to T side, the hard side on one of the harder T side maps. They win the pistol round. They're up 13-3. At this point, the game is all but won. Like I said, Fnatic was not a really good T-side team. They used to have to just grind out 2 or 3 rounds. They weren't in position to do that. They would have had to get an insane amount of gun rounds. They'd already lost the pistol, and they were going to force buy, so they were in a tough situation as is. Actually, they were on CT side here, but the point is, even though they were a very good CT side team, it's going to be very, very difficult, especially because you're not starting with money. You're starting with a broken economy, and essentially, you're not going to get a shot at it. It's already 13-3. By the time you get any money, you're never going to have a full buy. You're just going to lose the game outright, 16-3. So the game is all but won. It would have taken a miracle for Fnatic to win at this point in time. So Fnatic, on the next round, buys a scout, pulls out this crazy triple boost where Olofmeister can see right over the wall, and he's able to pick off LDLC a whole bunch of times. Somehow they're really confused. They don't know where he is. At one point in time later in the game, they even take a timeout, trying to figure out where he is. They still don't really get it. They can't do anything about it. They actually lose the game, and they just outright lose it. So here's the crazy thing. Not only did LDLC lose, but we find out after the match, Fnatic had saved this boost, specifically knowing it months in advance, for this moment. They could have used it in past matches. They could have used it against past opponents. Could have used it online to win a key. They never did it. They saved it until this moment, and they brought it out, and it actually won them the game. That's the thing. It could have, remember, this is a key context. It could have not won them a game. Could have won them 3 or 4 rounds. Could have won them 8 rounds. But it might not have mattered if LDLC had figured it out. If LDLC had never come to that part of the map. There's lots of ways in which LDLC could have stalled just straight up on this map, and it would be an amazing moment that we all remember, but it wouldn't have so drastically altered what happened. So here's the thing. After the game, the admins convene. Now, Fnatic think they've won the game, but they haven't because LDLC protests. The arguments last into the night. The last thing we hear before everyone goes to bed is it's said, Dreamhack says the final decision is we're just going to replay the second half. LDLC starts 12-3 because of texture, transparency, and immortal bug used by both teams to invalidate the second half, even though obviously the other one did it in the first half. But think, well, you both did it, so let's just say fair's fair and play the second half, which obviously is a big advantage still to LDLC. But here's the problem. First and foremost, a key piece of detail that is always forgotten is that wasn't the last quarterfinal of the day. Dignitas, now the core of Astralis, had to still play against Na'Vi. Now, in this matchup, the third map, the decider, ended up being randomed to Overpass. And the first map was Cobblestone. It was won by Na'Vi in shocking fashion. Second map was Mirage. And actually, it was very close. It was like 12-12. Dignitas looked like they might pull it out and push to a third map. So if that had happened, if we'd gone to a third map, it would have been Overpass then, but with no admin decision on what just happened on this boost. A lot of people forget that detail, and I'll obviously get into that in a minute. So when this match happened, LDLC Fnatic, pros were just going off on Twitter. Almost the whole world was against Fnatic, essentially. Like, this is bullshit. And even worse, everyone really got off on this whole concept that it was about pixel walking and that they'd done a pixel boost and that's what was illegal. But as we'll see later, that isn't what was illegal. So the context of what happened as a result of all of this is that LDLC, because they had found out they were going to have to replay the whole game, and they were so mentally shaken, and they thought it was bullshit, and it's so unfair, and FNATIC's beating us every time, and we've had it stolen back from us when we were going to beat them finally, they actually decide that they're going to forfeit. This is something that a lot of people knew, and it wasn't really mentioned publicly. LDLC, I was told behind the scenes, was actually going to forfeit. But basically, they were told, if you just wait, FNATIC's going to forfeit, actually. So FNATIC forfeits as well, because they have their own pressure on them, and they just decide, right, you know what, fuck it, we're just going to forfeit, it's over. And so if FNATIC forfeits, LDLC gets to go on, and obviously LDLC goes on to win the tournament. Now here's some key context. Since, like I said, Dignitas played Na'Vi while all this decision is still going on, while they're still figuring out what's going to happen, here's the part that people don't think about. What if Dignitas Na'Vi had gone to a third map? And what if, without any decision fully made, the teams had used the boost there? That is a huge admin error to even allow that to happen when you haven't fully resolved the other situation. Also, here's a key piece of context that is always forgotten, is that FNATIC got shockingly upset on Mirage by Hellraisers, who actually had Simple at the time, in a really close game in the group stage. If that doesn't happen, if FNATIC wins that game, then FNATIC goes through first in their group, and they would have played NIP in the first round, and they would have been on the other side of the bracket. Then they would have had Virtus Pro in the semi-finals. These are teams that FNATIC would have been quite heavily favoured to beat. So actually, if everything went to plan normally in the tournament, LDLC would have met FNATIC in the final of the tournament. Now here's the thing. If the same series takes place in the final, which obviously you can't say because different pressure, you played different matches, you watched each other, they also, FNATIC might have played Overpass before then and used the boost, who knows. But let's say the same match, the same series plays out in the final of the tournament. Now imagine this, the deciding map of the final of the tournament, FNATIC uses a boost to win, LDLC breaks apart completely, then we have the problems. Because think about it, when you win in the final, FNATIC's going to be celebrating, they're going to have the trophy. What are you going to do? You're going to halt the whole tournament? That would be the end of the world. That's what people aren't thinking about. That would be the whole tournament in chaos, everyone going even more apeshit, because it'd be the grand final this all took place in. Then you've got to figure it. There's limited time to even figure out the admin decision. You can't then sleep on it because the next day everyone needs to go home. We've all got our flights booked, etc. There's no more tournament at that point. You have to close down all the stage, etc. You can't replay the game. That's also another key detail. The scandal would have been insane. Fans would have hated them even more. But here's the thing you have to remember. Then there would have been way more probably publicity outside of esports. Oh, people used a potentially illegal bug to win the tournament final, etc. People would have gone apeshit outside of even just esports itself and Counter-Strike esports. Then you got to consider the hatred for FNATIC would have been 10 times worse because they would have won the tournament using this particular thing. I mean, you have to remember the context. Olaf and Krims, as JW revealed in my interview with him, actually were considering quitting in the new year in 2015 because the hatred was so much, people just despised them because of the cheating thing, accusations, and now this boost thing as well. They were quite young in the game at this point in time. They hadn't been at the top level for very long. They were legit considering retiring. Well, remember, that was the duo that brought FNATIC essentially this era of success, and the two majors they later went on to win. So if they retire, it's already over. And by the way, they might have with even more pressure on that point in time. Who knows? And remember, there was the Devil Walk tweet, which alluded to it, like, pray God, you know what you've done, or something along those lines. So think of the context in history if this happened in the final. Now, people forget this, but FNATIC only, with that lineup, ever failed to finish top 4 twice in their history. Dreamhack Winter, this instance where they forfeited, and Dreamhack Cluj-Napoca, another major, 2 majors later, 3 majors later, which was the last ever tournament that lineup played together and was really the end of their era. So if FNATIC hasn't lost this game, if FNATIC is allowed the boost, they go to the semis at least, very likely would have gone to the final because they'd have played Na'Vi there, and actually they always won over Na'Vi, and still to this day, those classic FNATIC lineups never lost to Na'Vi in a series. So very likely they're going to win this major. If that happens, they could have won 3 majors in a row. Now, obviously, you can't really say that because winning one major would change how you'd play next and how the other teams would play you and how the metagame would work. But in theory, they would be favourites to potentially win 3 majors. Also, another reason why maybe they wouldn't win 3 majors is, okay, Katowice, they were the best, yeah. But Cologne, I mean, you could argue they maybe weren't even the best at that tournament. That was a miracle run in itself. So maybe they win 2 majors and they don't win that one. That could go differently, right? But it would be possible to have won 3 majors in a row. Then you've got to consider they would have had an insane top 4 run because their top 4 streak got snapped at that point. They won another one after that was really good, but because theirs got snapped and Envy's continued on, Envy amassed a 14 tournament winning streak of top fours. And so they actually had that kind of in their corner, while Fnatic was the best team, but they had their own consistency thing. So that was how it was able to be for a while, the Fnatic Envious era, whereas it would have just straight up been the Fnatic era from the beginning, actually. There wouldn't be an Envious era at all, an LDLC era, whatever you want to call it. Then you've got to consider, maybe we could go the other way. Maybe by not forfeiting this game, maybe by LDLC forfeiting it and Fnatic moving on, now, maybe Fnatic win this major, but maybe that doesn't galvanize them as like, we've got the whole world against us, but you know what, we're all going to hunker down and fuck it. Maybe they don't become the villains of the scene. I mean, they'd be villains in a different way, but they don't get galvanized against that, because in later tournaments, DreamHack tours, etc., Fnatic would be totally booed by the crowd, and they didn't give a fuck. They used to just win anyway. They had been totally resolved. They'd been forged in the fires of that kind of hatred to be like, we're going to play the villain role, or we're going to play the anti-hero role, and we're going to win even when the crowds are against us. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten that mentality. Maybe they would have retired. Maybe they would have gone on and just been a bit more shaky mentally, not being able to handle it, because they never would have really even had the redeeming factor that they at least forfeited the game. That would be really interesting. I mean, one of the interesting things as well is LDLC went on to win that major. So that's one of the majors that they were able to win in their history. And that was probably the key moment of that lineup's history. Because remember, it was when they did the French Shuffle again that they won the next major. And they would have not only not beaten Fnatic, even with a forfeit, but it actually took a long time for them to beat Fnatic outright, even with the next lineup. It wasn't until Gfinity Champions with the Kenny S Apex lineup that they actually beat Fnatic for real, as in straight up just in the server, in a best of 3 series. That was actually a best of 5 series, but a best of X series. They beat them in the final of that tournament. Now, in terms of the boost itself, I mean, my thoughts on the boost, one thing people always forget is there's so many people who to this day spout off about that boost and don't even know the details of what happened. So people forget that, first of all, LDLC did their own boost, which broke the same rules. The transparency, using the looking at potentially being able to look through a texture that actually no one was looking through, and the immortal bug where you couldn't be killed from one spot on the map where people could see you. That's the real thing that it violated. Now, yes, Fnatic did it more and in more rounds because it was working every round and LDLC couldn't stop it, but that's a problem in itself right there. LDLC still did it, and how do you deduct those rounds and how does that work exactly? That's still something that's quite a big grey area. So the problem is, it wasn't even the pixel walk boost that everyone really claimed was illegal, because people went on an old rule set for that, and technically that was legal, and people were doing pixel boosts on other maps as well. So I don't know why that was still brought up to this day as the problem. So the legality issue is very questionable. That's why Fnatic thought they got away with it. They didn't know that you could see through this texture potentially. No one was using it for that. The immortality thing is more grey, because that's not really the area that most of the time you're looking at with this boost to get the advantage, which is actually down into the other side. So this is a very complex area that's not as clear cut and as black and white as people make out as it was. And the problem is, you're never going to get another boost that's that OP, but also wins you the whole map, and is on the deciding map, and is 2 key rivals, and is one team that's won them, and is finally going to get the upset, but then the other team comes back. The whole situation is so crazy, such a perfect storm of fuckery on all levels, that it'll never have that much impact again. That's the real reason when you add in the cheating accusations and the suspicion, and then the fact that people feel it's unfair. That's why it got such a hate train going. Because at the end of the day, it was an innovative boost, and it was clever, and it was baller to save it until that moment to play out then. There is something quite cool about that. You have to respect that to a degree, because it did play out perfectly for Fnatic. Does everyone really think that they knew this was illegal, that they knew that it would violate the rules? Because remember, LDLC's done a boost that actually has its own illegality component that they think's legal, and they think it's fine because it's a boost, and you just do it and it works, and let's see, and the admins would have to stop it, and the admins didn't, and nobody would have batted an eyelid if LDLC had gone on to win that match without the boost happening, and their boost would have been in the game or wouldn't have been deducted. You know, it's not as clear as people make out. People are very, very one-sided and pick their horse and really ride it to the end and pretend like LDLC did nothing wrong in this game. Certainly not the case whatsoever. What should they have done? That's another question to ask. Like, should they have restarted for the half? I don't know, maybe, because then you take out, here's the problem. If you restart the half, okay, and you let LDLC be 12-3 up. Now, the reason LDLC refuses that is because they know they might lose the game then. They want the pistol as well, because they've won the pistol, and that's what assures they've won the game. Here's my problem with that. Okay, if we restart the half, what we're saying is, Fnatic, your boost was illegal. We're going to take away the entire half, all the rounds that you won. We're also going to, by the way, going to take away LDLC's pistol round win. But you know what? We're going to let LDLC's 12-3 half stand, even though they did a boost that violated the texture bug and the immortality. So the same thing you did, but to a lesser degree, but they're going to get to keep those rounds. Now, how is that fair? Surely, logically, at this point in time, if you take away all Fanatics rounds, you should have to take away all the LDLC rounds where they did that. In fact, you should probably replay the whole map, right? That would probably be the only reasonable way to do it until say nobody do this boost, otherwise we immediately will disqualify you. That's part of the problem. LDLC's position of what they wanted from this was not fair. And the way LDLC leveraged the community against Fnatic was not fair and was not reasonable if you look at who actually violated what rules and the grey area of the rules, and that everyone was involved with doing, to a lesser degree, something that's actually illegal and would be ruled against now that we've had a time to go ahead and look at it in this sense. I mean, LDLC was happy to go ahead and essentially break a rule and themselves go through in the tournament and wanted to still have that in their favour. So I think that's actually very dangerous in that sense. Personally, I would like the map to have been decided by play. So I would like either LDLC accept that they're getting an advantage by having their boost count and just play the second half. And by the way, very likely still win the game. Sure, it's going to be tough to get 40 rounds, especially if Fnatic wins that CD pistol round, but you've got a good chance to do it. It's very likely you would still do it. Also, even the option to just replay the whole map, that wasn't offered by the admins, but I think that's a pretty good option. Let's just replay the map, and fuck it, maybe LDLC can win that. They actually were pretty good on Overpass in this tournament. So that whole thing just tilts me all in all. I mean, when people bring up that shit, that Fnatic, it turned out, asked this YouTuber who discovered it to take the video down and not tell everyone about it. People say that, so, see, they knew they were doing something wrong. No, they wanted it to be a secret so they could pull it out in pro play. That has nothing to do with knowing it was wrong. That in no way is implied in that. And as we've mentioned, other people were doing similar bugs which violated similar rules and also didn't know it was wrong. So people added that part in to make it seem more sinister. But that's, first of all, some bullshit circumstantial evidence where you're reading into it and projecting your own reasons as to why Fnatic did that. And yeah, that part really is irrelevant to whether or not Fnatic should have been punished and whether it was some sort of an illegal boost. It has nothing to do with it. And by the way, people pushed this hard at the time, but they said because Fnatic knew it months in advance and they asked someone to take it down, not only did they know it was wrong, but part of the reason people implied that they must have known it was wrong is because Fnatic didn't ask Valve if this bug's okay. Now, first of all, that's not the sort of thing that you contact Valve with. Like, it's none of Valve's business. If this turns out to be a legit boost, you don't have to ask their permission. Someone has to actually show that it's illegal. And at the time, you wouldn't have known the reasons it was illegal because what you're actually using it for, if you look at the way it was applied in the game and implemented, was not actually the benefits that you get that were considered illegal. Looking through that one bush into like the spawn with a fucking scout that no one was using it for, and that's not what you were doing with it. Or being immortal from like the party area or the balloons area. That's not the main reason why it was invented, why people were using it. That's a technicality which turned out to, in the end, invalidate the boost. So, no, you shouldn't have to contact him. And when other people make really crazy boosts, remember, Na'Vi had some Overpass boosts at Katowice in 2016. They didn't go and ask Valve, are those legal and all that sort of stuff. As far as I know, they tested out some boosts. I think they asked the admins at the major if some boosts were okay and checked in that sense. But it wasn't, they didn't ask Valve necessarily. Like, it's very complex as to how that all works. And I think, in fact, if they did ask Valve, that's mainly because of the context of this Fnatic boost. We never had anything that was as OP as this and that anyone had to check with in this sense. And if you know about the history of Counter-Strike, even if something turns out to be illegal, it doesn't get made illegal in that moment. In this sense, the rules were already there. But if that aspect of the rule hadn't applied and they'd have done it and won and then people had decided, well, that does break the map, so you shouldn't be allowed to do it. Yeah, but that would have to be ruled and added into the rules after this match and probably would have been if it had been a legal boost, but people thought it was too OP in that particular sense. Or after the tournament. So it's not as simple as people made out there. And I actually think the context where if it happened in the final, imagine how crazy it is, or if Dignitas and Na'Vi had done it in their next game, which was going on as the admin's ruling was taking place, I think that's more crazy. People don't realize that context, which would have changed how the same match could have happened, but the scale of it would have been so insane, the scandal. So I wanted to add in that context, because I think it's often missed, and people still to this day think they know what happened, but don't, and make it out like it's some black and white thing where they're just reading people's minds and knowing what everyone else thought in the scenario. Well, the whole point is, it was a crazy moment. It was an epic moment. It really did change the history of the game in terms of both the teams and who won the game, obviously, and it was a very controversial moment because it was so complex and the rule turned out not to be what we thought it was and no one really understood. It was very confusing for everyone in the game and after the game, and obviously the implications of what it meant for CS.